and donating it to a dream team of lawyers to prosecute these guys that could get OJ off. But, so I kept thinking about that, and so I've been kind of sitting on it until after tonight. Sandra's going to print a letter that I wrote in the Information Press and encouraging people to send money to ACLU, Center for Constitutional Rights, and any other organization that is really doing the legal work that needs to be done. Because if everybody just sent $10, a friend of mine did the numbers, crunched the numbers, and he came up with $2.5 billion that we could put towards the cause of bettering the situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they have fabulous lawyers at these places who could be earning $600,000 a year, and they're earning about 40, living in New York. Well, I met one in particular, and his cuff was falling off his pants. I said, "You need any help with that? I can sew that up." So yeah, they need the money.
And you listed a bunch of groups before. I have to say I prefer some of them to others, not because they have better lawyers, but because they stand up for impeachment. The Center for Constitutional Rights, the National Lawyers Guild, these are groups that say, we stand for impeachment, that are pushing for impeachment. The ACLU, which led the charge to impeachment 35 years ago, won't touch it until Nancy Pelosi does. So I have second thoughts about giving the ACLU your money. But the general idea of giving your money to a good group is excellent. I almost prefer giving your money to a good candidate. And if you give your money to Shirley Gallup or Cindy Sheehan, both of whom are running against Nancy Pelosi, and you write for impeachment, and you photocopy it, and you send it, the photocopy to Pelosi and to your newspaper, you're getting a message out there. I was just down in Ventura and spent a long time talking with a woman named Mary Pallant, who's running as a Democrat against Republican Gallagly. And he's a disaster, and she's brilliant and wonderful. And you send her your money and send a photocopy of the check to Gallagly and send it to the newspapers and get on the radio shows. You got good radio shows. It's an excellent idea.
Yeah.
When you were talking, you mentioned you think that Obama is for sure. Mathematics is okay, but most everything is not mathematical. And the other candidate I don't want to mention here, before getting even the nomination, is threatening to obliterate another country of 17 million people. And in every step of the way has been with Bush Cheney voting in the Congress. Is there any way to stop that other candidate to become that other contender to become the nominee? You will not be having much success in impeaching Bush Cheney as you have had in the 9 months, but in the next 2 or 3 months you may be able to stop that. Just as a suggestion.
The only way that Hillary Clinton can become the nominee, and I'm sorry, it's indisputable fact, the only way is either some outrageously catastrophic Eliot Spitzer scandal completely eliminates Obama, or the so-called superdelegates pull an anti-democratic coup. This is the only way that she's going to become the nominee, and we don't have that much control. You can influence your local superdelegates, tell them to follow the people's will. Other than that, I think your energy ought to go where it has to go if we're going to have a democratic republic, whoever the hell's running it. And that is where you predict defeat. You can predict defeat, you can predict success, but tell me how we're going to have a democracy, how we're going to have a president rather than an emperor if we don't push for it, and how we can better influence the debate and the discussion and the positions of the candidates than by building a movement that pushes for what we want. I don't see it.
Another one? Yeah. I'm thinking of politicians who don't call for impeachment. Are they, I don't understand this too well, but are they, does calling for impeachment subject them to being cut off by their party? Is this why they don't? Is this the fear behind it?
Yes. There are no Congress members in Washington anymore representing constituents in a district. There's just the voice of the Republican Party and the voice of the Democratic Party. There's not a single Congress member who gives a damn about how much power Congress has versus the White House. It's all about, is the next emperor going to be a Democrat or a Republican?
So that means then that one reason that they don't call for impeachment is because they will be abandoned by their party, whichever party,
The primary
if they
reason
do.
for most Democrats and Republicans is that the party leadership is against it. They live in this little bubble where it's of enormous importance in the grand scheme of the world. Who chairs a subcommittee, whose bills get brought up for votes, who ranks where in the standings. These are of enormous importance compared to things like human life. You know, and so,
is there some way to deal with it from that point of view, to attack, if that's one of the main problems, is there some way to deal with that?
well, it means that you can't just influence your Congress member. You have to try, and you can, it's possible. We also have to get Pelosi and Obama, or if you like, I'll say Obama or Clinton, and Pelosi. Nobody in Washington will do anything that their presidential nominee is not okay with, and nobody will do anything that their party leadership is not okay with. So we have to get to them. And one way to get to them indirectly is by building a critical mass of Congress members. I mean, there are some dozens of Congress members who want impeachment. There are about 10 on the Judiciary Committee who want impeachment. If we can get more, that's one way to influence
And over the
Congress.
last year, the numbers have increased,
Yes.
right? So,
Yes.
My shot?
Yeah.
My name is Al Barrow. Thank you for coming. It's great having a Department of Justice person here as well as David. And I did see your blogs. You presented at Fire Valley Lake on February 11th talking about it. My question is impeachment required under the Constitution? And does our representatives have a constitutional responsibility when they swore to uphold the Constitution to follow this investigation if they perceive there are alleged crimes and misdemeanors?
right. Well, first of all, the word impeachment is probably the most confusing word that we have out today. Impeachment is a process. So the short answer is yes, they are sworn to follow the Constitution. The Constitution provides in 6 different places, I go like this, but it's 6, for impeachment. And it is the remedy when there is conduct by the president or by other officials in the executive branch that constitutes high crimes and misdemeanors. And it is a process. So what we're asking for them to do is to begin this process. It's not saying, you know, go in and take the hook out and, you know, take these people out with a hook. It's talking about investigations. When Barbara Jordan talked about it for the Nixon and the time of Nixon, she talked about it as an inquisition, which is a very loaded word, but she meant it in the very neutral sense. It's a process of inquiry, and that's what they are required to do. So they are violating their oaths because they're completely ignoring a whole part of the Constitution. And what Barbara
We could file a
Jordan,
lawsuit against them for that?
I don't know what the lawsuit would be. The trouble with Congress members is I don't personally know of any legal action you can take against them to make them do things along those lines, except all you can do is vote them out.
I would just add quickly that it gets a little complicated or a little disingenuous to go asking for investigations when there's indisputable evidence already on the table, right? When we passed an article against Nixon for refusing a subpoena, and these guys refuse subpoenas on a weekly basis, when the president has confessed on video to violating FISA, when the president has signed an order authorizing torture, when the evidence is sitting in front of you, to go and ask for an investigation is a little weird because for a year and a half, they've held investigations, they've held hearings that didn't really bring out the facts. The facts we have come out through the media, but reviewed the facts, closed the hearings, documented, you know, The first hearing in January '07 that Conyers held was on signing statements. Here's a president who signs bills into law, writes a statement saying, I'm going to violate these parts of the law, and proceeds to violate them. This is openly advertised public criminality posted on the White House website. And he holds a hearing, and the Justice Department folks come in and say, well, don't worry about it, it's just like a press release, just ignore them. You know, well, the Government Accountability Office has done studies and found that in a huge percentage of cases, they actually go ahead and violate those laws that they announced they had the right to violate. So it's not just a press release. So how do you hold an investigation of that? Right? You don't. You open the hearing, you point to the evidence, you close the hearing, and you impeach them. And everybody knows there's not an investigation needed.
Right, well, I guess I disagree with you a little bit, because it doesn't matter to me what you call it. There has to be some forum in Congress where you start this proceeding. And I'm not going to worry if people call it an impeachment investigation, or if they call it a hearing, or whatever. It's just that they need to start doing it. And you've got to get people into
It's called
I agree
on
with
the
you,
boat, you
because
know?
if you call it an impeachment hearing, then the television cameras are there.
Right.
If you just call it a hearing, like they've been doing for a year and a half, it's not even on C-SPAN.
Right,
So
but
that's
yeah.
why it has to be an impeachment hearing. And you
Yeah.
can drag it out for months, I'd be delighted, it would
Yeah.
educate the public. I'm just
Yeah.
saying, we don't need new evidence.
No, we don't, and that's why I wrote the book, because it's already there.
So along those lines, who do we go after?
I actually don't know. I do know a number of them do, but I don't know how many. They have a report.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Elizabeth mentioned that we can oppose the war every day in some kind of way. I'm just wondering what we can do, which way. Is it a website to post your opinion, or what can we do? How we oppose? How we show?
Well, I think David listed a whole bunch of things which you can do, which, you know, write letters to your editor, get more people to show up with you at the congressional representatives' offices, on and on.
I think keeping the military out of your high schools and junior high schools
Is really important,
is
yeah.
very, very effective. I would highly recommend a website called NOMY, NNOMY.org, which is National Network Opposing Militarization of Youth. But there's tons of things you can do, from media activism to simple activism to civil disobedience. You know, there's no end to things you can do. I mean, I just read a book called Grandmothers Against the War, where an elderly woman in New York City called up a couple of her friends, and they started holding a weekly vigil that they've now been holding for 4 or 5 years, and they went and tried to get themselves recruited at the Times Square military recruitment office. Said, take us, right? Got the media there, sat down, got hauled off to jail, got taken to court, put the war on trial, got acquitted, worked the media like pros through the whole thing. Now they're traveling the world, speaking, explaining that Americans don't support this thing. And we're going to need some international allies.
And let me just add to that too, referring to young people, you don't have to be an expert. Every person in this room is fully qualified to talk about these things. And I was just at a high school, for example, an alternative high school in Rochester, where I started off by asking these kids, first of all, how many of you have a relative or friend or whatever in Iraq right now? Out of 50 kids, 11 of them did. Then I asked them, how many of you think this Iraq war has something to do with you? How many do you think? None. And then I started telling them things like, if we took all the money that is used for the war, we could have 40 million full-time scholarships to public schools. And these are poor kids. And I started telling them about how the Iraqi soldiers have to buy their own helmets if they lose their helmet, even if they're brain damaged, they have to pay for their helmet. And I started talking to them about these things. And I can't say that I brought around 50 kids, but I think I brought around 5 or 6. And you can get groups of high school kids, you can get college kids. I think it's really important for us to bring young people into this thing.
Could we show this at our Democratic clubs and other places, this meeting that's being filmed?
Sure.
think if you don't, we'll sue you, right?
Well, we'll just be hurt. We'll be very
Just
hurt.
a quick comment on my behalf too, that, 30 years ago, 35 years ago, the outlaws, we really stopped nuclear power from the building more plants, because we didn't sit home and watch TV, but we got out and we walked. And I'd like to see more people get away from their computer, and jail's not that bad of a place, they might make it worse, I've done it. But you have to put your life on the line, because really this is where we're at, and I don't mean, but I'd really like to see more people, like what I do, you can all do. Get together, bring a speaker to town, set a protest up. Don't make it keeping the same people that have to keep doing it. Everybody do a little bit, just do it in your neighborhood, do it at your church, do it in your group. But do something beyond.
And find the groups that work on housing and lending and poverty and living wage, and go support whatever they're doing. Get to know them, become someone they trust, and do events together on stopping the war where all the money's going and on where the money could be going. These events can have young people and people of color, and we can get different people involved. But there are very active groups of people who are active on different things, and we don't make the connections. And it's hard, long work to build trust, but we have to do that.
And also, I have one other thing to say about this, which is something Daniel Ellsberg talks about sometimes. And you've been involved as an activist for many years, and I was doing prosecutions, a different form, I suppose. But one thing I think it's important to be sensitive to is a lot of people just don't feel comfortable. And Daniel Ellsberg talks about how the transformation he had to go through, it wasn't a fear of getting arrested or anything, it was a fear of feeling foolish, or a fear of being embarrassed, or just standing out. And I think when you try to bring people in with you and talk to them and say, hey, come to this protest with me, that's something to really come right out and address. This is not a radical, crazy thing to do. This is an absolutely dignified and citizen-like thing to do, which is to stand up for your country and to stand up for these life and death issues. And they're not just about the life and death of the country, which they are, the democracy. They're about the lives and deaths of people that are happening every single day. So it's a very dignified and noble thing to do. And it's not crazy. It's crazy not to do it.
Just a
I've
quick,
got a few.
Sandra. I don't know who other than Lois is a super delegate locally. Do we have any other super delegates around here that we should know about or write?
Okay.
Who beside Lois?
Lois.
Beside Lois. Every time.
I have a phone number. Not here, but yeah, Dennis is one. Yes, signatures.
Oh, I thought you meant here.
You can
Oh.
Google super delegate and in 30 seconds have the list. I don't know who locally is a super.
Yeah, I was trying to find out if there was anybody here. I didn't see anybody.
Well, at least we can write the Lois.
Well, you can try. Yeah, I'll do that.
Do you think the Republicans